Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for your patience. We are experiencing some technical difficulties that we're working on, and we will get started just in a few minutes. Thank you very much for your patience, and welcome to our second session on the workshop on good regulatory practices and its implementation in the medical device sector. We are about to get started. Just a few minutes, please.
Sandra?
Yes.
Both Bongani and Lydia will join us. Lydia joined in there as an attendee, but she'll come back and join so that she's able to share her presentation. And Bongani as well indicated that he was struggling with the connection where he is. So if he's struggling, I'll have to have him on my phone and see if that will work.
Okay, perfect. So then we're getting started. Thank you very much, Dr. Mathibe. Thank you very much for all our participants. Thank you very much for your patience. So we are ready to get started with our second session. I'm going to be really quick sharing with you just a quick the housekeeping message that we generally do for everybody to be aware that this session is being recorded. It is going to be uploaded along with all the materials at the MDRC website. The microphones of all participants are closed as to prevent any background noise. We welcome you to post all your questions at the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform. May the moderators of the panels post them to the panelists so we can have these as interactive as possible. And for the speakers, when it is when feasible, we appreciate for you to get your cameras open while your presentation. So here it is, our agenda for today. We have a couple of panels where we're going to be reviewing the legislative and regulatory framework for medical devices as per its current situation and how do we see the roadmap for the future. And then we have a second one that is related to technical standardization and stakeholders participation. So welcome, thank you very much. And Dr. Mathibe, we'd appreciate your welcome message.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And thanks for the colleagues as well, taking their time off, to attend this meeting and supporting, this initiative. Really appreciate your attendance and also appreciate your comment. And in today's topic, we'll be looking at, the legislative framework and the impact of that in the medical device industry. And also, we have our legal person who's speaking about the boundaries that the boundaries that are in controlling us, if we're in this medical device industry. So, I'm looking forward to today's topics and also some of the comments. I think I would, if you can, Bongani, mute. Thanks, Bongani. So we'll be speaking about the legislative framework and where we are as an organization, also listening to other perspectives from the industry. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion, and thanks to the panel members who have joined today and as indicated the support as well. So I'll hand over back to the chair, to the moderator of the day. Thank you very much. Sandra and Stephen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathibe. So let me start by introducing the moderator of our first panel, Stephen Bibes. He's Vice President for Global Strategy and Analysis at Advanced Medical Technology Association, AdvaMed, and he's the leader of the COVID-19 Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project. Stephen, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to have been invited to moderate this session, and of course to be working on this MDRC Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project together with all of our partners and stakeholders, including SAHPRA. This, as we talked about yesterday, this is a global initiative with regional legs and national efforts, and it really does require the all hands on deck work to accelerate medical device regulatory convergence. And there's many aspects to this, standardization and trade and health benchmarks, all being different components. But in order for us to really properly construct the work streams and properly tie together what we are doing in South Africa together with broader Africa regional and global work, it's important that we have a sense of the landscape of the regulatory frameworks and the work of the regulatory authority and industry working together. So I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to review that in very high level fashion with all of you this morning. And we have three speakers. First, we have Mr. Bongani Ngobo with SAHPRA, who will be giving us the legislative perspective and the state of play. Ms. Lydia, and Lydia, I apologize in advance, Lydia M. Motohewa manager for registration, also with SAPRA. And it will be very important for us to hear from both of you on the state of play, that all of the parameters, both the existing and any changes happening to the regulatory framework affecting medical devices. And then we will ask Madeline Pierce with SAMED, also with Philips, for her views from the private sector. And Madeline is in charge of is the director for international regulatory affairs, including for Africa and Turkey and other markets globally. So with that very brief introduction, I wish to first pass it to you, Bongani, for your introductory remarks. We'll have about 10 minutes each, and then we will have time at the end for questions and answers. So with that, Bongani, over to you.
Colleagues, my name is Bongani Ngcobo. I'm the Legal Regulatory Advisor for SAPRA. I'll be taking you colleagues through the legislative framework in respect of medical devices. The relevant legislation for this purpose is the Medical and the Related Substances Act. The Act was amended in 2015. That was the last amendment, and in it, the Act then regulates, amongst other things, medical devices as well. So it's a process that it's a regulatory framework that is in place right now, and we are, however, in the process of reviewing the Act in order to redraft it and come up with a new piece of legislation, which will, once that process has started, and will engage the industry in order to get the input before we can finalize that process. But what I can just emphasize that at this point in time, we'll encourage the industry to work with us and comply with this. Is a piece of legislation that we have, despite we are aware, let me put it that way, that we are aware of some challenges which have led to us to actually review the Act in order to address some challenges. But as I say, we will then get back to, we'll work together with the industry in an effort to try and address whatever challenges that the Act in its current form present to us in terms of application and in terms of interpretation. But as matter stands now, this is the Act that is in place. I'm not too sure if there are any specific areas that the colleagues will want me to focus on, but I can only be able, if there are specific questions, then to then focus maybe if there are any specific sections or areas of the Act that the colleagues will want me to talk to. But I'll pause here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sandra, should we go to some questions now? And we do have this very nice opportunity to drill down into specific questions from the participants. Are there any particular directions in which you'd like us to take the conversation, or should we proceed through?
I think we can probably proceed to and wait for our attendees to pose questions and then bring them at the end.
Okay, and do we already have any questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
Oh, there's a question posted here at the chat box, and the question is there a timeline for the change to the Act, and how does this affect the regulations being published?
Sorry, if you can repeat the question, please.
Yes, sure. Is there a timeline for the change, and how does this affect the regulations being published?
Well, colleagues will understand the legislative process. It's a very long process. We are trying to move as fast as we can with this process, but colleagues will have to appreciate that. As the authority, we draft the legislation. Maybe let me just do it this way. Let me just give you a high-level legislative process until it becomes an act. So in this instance, we'll draft we'll give the first draft to. We'll come up with the first draft, which will be submitted to the department, which is Department of Health, National Health. And then the department, it runs its own internal processes to get the act for public comments. And once that process is completed, it has to be submitted to Parliament, and then there's a parliamentary processes, which unfortunately we do not have control over. Once we hand over the project to the department, we cannot then dictate as to how fast or how slow should the process go, because they have their own timelines, and the parliamentary as well. Parliamentary processes also have their own timelines. So it's very difficult to put any determinative timeline as to when do we envisage to finalize this process. But we are hoping that at least by the end of next year, we should have some direction as to how far we'll have progressed in this act. As we have started with the process, but yeah, we were subjected to, there are these other dependencies that we don't have control over. Thank you.
Thank you, Bongani.
I think there was another question that came in as well.
Yes. There's several, and there's a follow-up question, and it says, what about the publication for amended regulations for medical devices and IVDs? What will be the process and timeline we may expect?
Okay, I don't know if I'll ask from my colleagues if they want me to speak to that, or they will speak to it, but I can answer it if my colleagues can I get a direction from.
Yes, sorry, Bongani, to come through. I have indicated that Lydia will communicate that on my response.
Okay.
Immediately. Look at that. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Very good. The next question in the queue says, if the Medicines Act is under review, would it not be useful for industry to comment on what would be improved in the current act? And so maybe a related question is has that public consultation, so to speak, already occurred, or will it be occurring?
Okay. Yeah, good. Thank you for that question. And it's a good question. So what we intend to do, once we have finalized drafting the piece of the legislation, we'll then engage in the stakeholder engagement, where we'll then solicit the stakeholders' input on the draft before we even submit it to the Department of Health for processing further. So in other words, I can say that this piece of legislation will have, if I can say so, two stage of public comments, because we'll ask the industry, which will be part of the stakeholders, to make input in our early draft, and then when it's at the department, they will also have an opportunity to comment further if there are any other comments that they intend to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mungani. And the next question related to that, it says, how and when can industry be involved at this early stage in the Act 101 improvement?
Well, I will say, I think it's very, very, very early for now to engage stakeholders in this process. As I've said, we are still in the early stages of this project, of this process. So at a right time, and then we'll then engage in the industry, all the stakeholders, including the industry, for their input and their participation.
Okay, very good. The next question says, good afternoon. Do you anticipate product registration call-up before we have an opportunity to review the Act? Many thanks.
I will not comment on specifics. As I said, it's still a work in progress. So we have not taken any particular position as to how the Act is going to look like. But as I've said, we are doing a holistic review of the Act, and we'll engage every stakeholder along the way to make sure. So if those comments, those input come from the industry, we'll consider them, and we'll engage going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bongani. I see Dr. Mutibe, your hand is up, and maybe you might also wish to take a crack at answering the next question that says, do you have some indication when this draft will be available for comment? Over to you.
Okay, I just want to maybe with the organizers, or maybe ask the participant to please put their question and answers on the Q&A, because if you put it on the chat, I can't answer directly, because once you put in the chat and there's other chat that follows, when I answer, it becomes very difficult. Then somebody might not know if I'm answering them. So if you may please put your question on the chat, then I mean on the Q&A part, and then I'll answer them, because I was trying to answer the one on the product registration, but if I type, it comes like after 2 communication down. So, but the answer to that one is, do you anticipate product registration call-up before any opportunity? Yes, that has nothing to do with the Act, change on the Act. That answer is yes. So, but if the question, can they be please placed on the Q&A so I can assist? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mutibe, for that clarification. And then to that last question in the chat, which is also now in the Q&A, do you have some indication when this draft will be available for comment? Oh.
I think I've already answered that question, Stephen. So yeah, I've already indicated that the Act is still in its infancy stages. We have not even made any determination internally as to how long we think it will take and when we are likely to finalize the project. Thank you.
Very well, Bongani. Before we move on to Lydia, any final remarks before we go to her, and then to Madeline and Q&A? Wallen, please.
Thanks, Stephen. It's not a question to the speaker. It's just for Sandra. Remember, I requested to do the presentation before 3, so I'm not sure where on the agenda is my time slot. I see the time is 25 to 3. Maybe Sandra can advise on that.
I think it's fine. Go ahead, Sandra, please.
Yes, thank you, and apologies that we started later as compared to what we were expecting. So I'd like to propose, Stephen, if it is okay with you, and if time permits, both for Lydia and Madeline, if we could have Pauline sharing her presentation, even though that's on standardization, but for us not to miss the opportunity to listen to what she has to share with us. So if it would work for you and the panelists, we'd certainly appreciate the opportunity.
Certainly okay for me, and we very much would like to accommodate Fallen. Would that work for you, Lydia?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
it's fine with me.
So Sandra, back to you.
Okay, just Madeline, does that work for you too? To get you a little later?
That's absolutely fine, no problem.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, everyone, for your understanding. So Pauline, we are gonna get straight with your presentation. Thank you very much. The floor is yours. You can share your screen.
Thanks, Sandra. Thank you very much. Let me try and share my screen.
If you prefer, I can do that for you.
Do you have my presentation with you?
Yes, I do.
Please share for me. I'm used to Teams
Okay.
than Zoom.
No worries, no worries. So just give me 1 second and
you.
I'll start sharing. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you
Perfect.
very much, Sandra.
No, thank you. Okay,
I hope everyone can see the presentation.
yes, I guess so.
Sandra, I
Okay.
see it not yet in presentation
Okay.
mode.
Yes.
I'm
Sandra?
sorry. Is it in presentation mode or not?
No.
Okay, sorry. Just give me 1 more second. And
Okay.
I'll take care of it.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. My name is Pauline Moribula from the South African Bureau of Standards. I'm in the standards development area within the standards division. I'll be doing my presentation on the standards development process. We can move on to the next slide, Sandra. Why do we develop standards? Standards are developed to improve the quality of goods and services, and also to improve the quality of life society by paying attention to matters such as safety, health, and protection of the environment. Next slide, please. How do we develop standards? Standards are developed only when there is a need for them. They are also developed by the technical committee governed by the South African Bureau of Standards. And the technical committee member representative is any individual that is nominated by his or her organization to represent it in the committee. Standards are decided upon by a way of consensus. That's how we develop our standards. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the standards development process, how we go about developing the standard. There is a due process that we follow for development of any national standard. The first stage for development of the standard is stage 00, which is called preliminary work item stage, whereby a request for development of the standard is submitted to the SABS. Then the assessment of the market relevance is also conducted at the SABS. Then we move on to stage 10. Once the preliminary work item is concluded, the next stage would be the proposal stage, whereby the TC will have to endorse the proposal and also have that proposal approved by the standard approval committee. And once the proposal is approved by the standards approval committee, we have the next stage, which is the preparatory stage, whereby a working draft is now put together by the relevant experts for the development of that standard. They prepare a draft, which is called working draft, which is then submitted to the TC or the subcommittee for also approval. Then that stage would be called stage 10. Stage 30, which is the committee draft stage. We call it CD stage. That's where the committee will have to reach consensus for the development of that particular standard. And once the committee has reached consensus on the draft or the content of the standard, then it goes to inquiry stage, which is the DSS stage. We call it draft South African standard stage. That's when it is published to the public for comment stage as well, because now the committee have agreed, the technical committee has agreed on the content, but before that content of the standard can be published and be called a national standard, it will have to be published to the public for commenting period of about 2 months. So once that process is finalized, and if we don't receive any comments from the public, then the document will be prepared for publication stage, which is stage 50, is the very last stage for development of the standard, which is the publication stage, whereby the document now gets edited. We call it a final edit because even before it goes out for public inquiry, it gets edited. But after the public inquiry stage, it also gets edited again to finalize it. And then even to verify if the due process has been followed, that verification will be done by the responsible program manager in the space, and also the quality assurance officer, just to ensure that the due process was followed. And once that is done, then the document is submitted to the Standard Approval Committee, which we call it SEC, for approval. That's where the standard will be approved and made available for sale. We can move on to the next stage, Sandra. Slide, sorry. So we do have lots of SEPS technical committees. We have different types of technical committees covering different scopes. So for the purpose of this workshop, I only prepared 2 slides on the technical committees that are in the field of medical devices. So we do have a committee for medical devices, which we call SEPS-TC 1039, is the committee for medical devices. And the very same technical committee has got 2 subcommittees under it, which covers the sterilization and healthcare products, and also the general aspects for medical devices. We do have 2 subcommittees. One subcommittee is for sterilization and healthcare products, and the other subcommittee for general aspects for medical devices. Next slide, please, Sandra. We also have standards under medical devices committee that I've spoken about. SEPS-TC 1039 and its subcommittees has a total of 52 published standards, which covers surgical medical devices, syringes, medical gloves, and the sterilization of healthcare products. So we also have some of the projects that are currently opened on the program of work of SEPS-TC 1039 and its subcommittee. So we have a total of 9 projects on the program of work. They are currently for adoption of the ISO standards for biological evaluation of medical devices. So those projects are still in progress. They are going under the very same process that I've taken you through in the previous slide, whereby the due process is followed, proposal being approved by the committee, then goes to the Standard Approval Committee, having the draft sent out to the public for comments, and then prepare the document for publication. But in terms of adoption, the process is much quicker than if you have to develop a brand new standard or a homegrown standard from scratch. Because when you adopt, then you just you don't have to develop the draft from scratch. You don't have to come up with a new content of the standard, but the committee just review what is already there internationally, and then if they are happy with the content, and if the content is suitable for our national need, then they just adopt it as it is. They don't have to develop a working draft, which happens when you develop a standard from scratch, which is called a homegrown standard. So under the medical devices standard, most of the standards are adopted from ISO or from EN standards. So it's just few that were developed locally that are called homegrown standards. Most of them are adopted standards from international ones. So we currently have 9 projects that are currently on the program of work for adoption of the ISO standards for biological evaluation of medical devices. Next slide, Sandra, which I believe is the last. Yes, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. I think it was really very enlightening, all what you shared with us. Let me just check we have some questions.
There's one, the last question, Sandra, if you do
Oh.
not belong, SME question.
Perfect. So the last question is, the question that we have posted is, if you do not belong to an organization, but consult as an SME to many companies and have the expertise to assist, how could you apply for being considered to be a part of a TC in SABS?
Unfortunately, you wouldn't be a participating member, because when you join the committee, I actually had the same question earlier this morning from one of my team members. She actually got the same query from one of the public stakeholders wanting to join the committee, but they resigned from the organization that they worked for, and that organization is our committee member actually. But now that person, the representative, has resigned, but she still has interest in development of the standards within that space. So she was asking, even if I've resigned, can I still be participating in this committee? But the answer was no, because now when you participate, who are you representing? Because you are no longer representing the views of that organization. So in that case, the only way for that person or whoever who doesn't belong to any organization could still participate is during the drafting phase, when the working draft is put together. That person could still be considered as an expert in the field, because the working group is just there for temporary purpose, just to develop the draft. And once the draft is finalized and agreed by the committee, then we disband the working group members. We disband the working group altogether. Then we don't have it until the standard gets revised or until when they are needed. So the option that we are left with is to join the working group if you don't belong to any organization. I hope I've answered the question.
Yes, I think it certainly does. And probably, I think that the other stage that subject matter experts can provide input is during the public consultation, correct?
Even during the public consultation, yes, then you are welcome. You can still comment there. And obviously, whoever commented the public stage, their comments are considered. We cannot proceed with publication without considering the comments. If you're not in the committee, we still look into your comments and call the committee together to review the comments and decide on the way forward. And if ever the committee needs more clarity on the comments received from the public, then we arrange a meeting and then call whoever has commented during the public stage to come and give clarity to their comments, so that the committee can be able to make an informed decision. But then it happens sometimes whereby when we receive comments from the public, is something like new altogether, which the committee didn't consider during the development. And in that case, sometimes the committee will refer the document back to the working group for them to relook into the comments, because the working group is a group of experts only specializing in that particular scope of work at the time. So they can refer the document back to the working group. And if they do so, then we always invite whoever commented during public who does not belong to that working group or who does not belong into the committee to come and share their expertise, so that the committee can be able to make an informed decision. So at least you'll still be given opportunity to have your inputs to the standard.
Sandra, may I interject with a follow-up question?
Please.
For Fallen? Fallen, under the committee rules of SOBS, is it allowed that let's say an SME could designate a consultant as their representative, and if there's and that could be their consultant, and if that consultant has a different client, that other client designates that same individual to be their representative on the technical committee?
Yes, they can do that. They can do that, as long as they make it clear to us it can be accepted.
Okay,
yeah, because even our membership form does give that option where you have to indicate who are you representing, consultant, or then you will have that opportunity to tick.
Excellent. That would seem to allow one in response to the inquiry. So sorry, Sandra, back to you.
No,
Yes.
thank you so much. I mean, I think it helps clarifying that in reality, the work that you are doing is really structured in a way that all relevant stakeholders do have an opportunity to provide with their expertise, to provide with their analysis in order to ensure that the final product is really including all these different perspectives. So this is really great to know, and thank you very much, Stephen, for complementing the question. And probably in that same line, so who do you think? Who is able to join? I think that as far as we see working everywhere in the world, it is all relevant stakeholders, of course, under the procedures that you have in place for them to be authorized to participate. And that goes from the regulator themselves all the way
Yes.
to academia, industry, etc. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that and how the process works, that could be very helpful also for our audience today.
Okay, Sandra, you've actually just, in a nutshell, responded to that, because when we establish the committee, we always try and make sure that our committee is well balanced. And when we say it's well balanced, it's when we have the regulator in the room, we have academia in the room, we have the manufacturer in the room, we have the consumer in the room. All that make our committee balanced. So we try by all means to get all the stakeholders in one room. It's just unfortunate that sometimes it's not possible, but when we say the committee is balanced, then we need all of them in one room. Even, let's say, in one department, for example, I'm in the natural science department. If there is a need for establishment of a medical device committee, maybe another subcommittee that will cover another scope of medical devices, then that will have to be approved by the standard approval committee. So for me to even submit that request to the standard approval committee for approval, then I will have to make sure that the committee that I'm proposing to be established is well balanced by trying by all means to get all those relevant stakeholders that you've mentioned earlier. So it is very important. We don't just establish a committee with two representatives, two organizations, regulator and manufacturer only. We try by all means to get relevant stakeholders to be involved during the development of the standard. If it's only two organizations, it will not even be approved for as an official committee. They will not allow that. They will say, go back and source more stakeholders.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We have several questions for you. The next one is, there are other TCs that have an impact on medical devices like TC 1022, 0038, and 0162 spring to mind. Will topics under these TCs be considered in the broader medical devices space, even if they aren't dealt with under medical devices TC?
I'm just looking at the question now. Yes, we do have TC 1022, but this 1022, TC 1022 is for disinfectants. We have that one as disinfectant. I don't think it does have impact on the medical devices one. This one, they're not mirroring each other. And we also have TC 38, which is our textile committee. I hope the same TC numbers are the SABS ones. I mean, for the person who raised the question, because the number could mean something else, but I'm just giving the titles here to make sure that we are talking about the same committee. TC 1022 is the disinfectant one, and TC 38 is the textile and fiber ones. And TC 162, unfortunately, I'm not sure which one is this. I don't think it belongs to my area, natural science. So 1022, I'm familiar with this, is the disinfectant, which belongs to natural science, and TC 38 is the textile one, which I also manage. So in terms of medical devices impact, there isn't much of relationship between the three committees that I'm aware of.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, Melanie, if you would like to elaborate a little more on your concern, we're happy to bring it again for the discussion. And we have here a couple of other questions from Kahesh D. Whom are the working group committee members? Are their CV publicly published?
No, the working group members, their CVs are not supposed to be they don't get published. You just share your expertise with the committee by email, or the standards writer, who's the responsible officer for the committee. As long as you just tell us that you have expertise in the field, you don't need to bring us your CV. The only time when we require CV from committee members is when they are nominated to be the chairs of the committee. If you are nominated to chair one of the technical committee, that's when we request your abridged CV and your expertise in details and your experience in the standards development workspace, and also internationally, locally and internationally. And yeah, that's all. That's why we ask for your CV when you are nominated to be the chair of one of the technical committees. Other than that, even the committee members, they're not supposed to send us their CVs. They just complete the form. And with committee members, remember, they get nominated by their organizations. It's not them. The member actually is the organization. They are just the representatives. So we don't even ask for their CV as long as they're nominated, and the nominator will just have to sign that nomination form to say, I'm nominating 1, 2, 3 to participate in the committee for medical devices because of their expertise, but we don't really require CV for committee members.
Perfect. And we have here an additional comment from Melanie on the TC 1022. She's advising that disinfectants used on medical devices are in fact medical devices. They're also textile-based medical devices, just to complement on the other.
Yeah, they could be a relationship between the three. That's true. I agree.
Okay, perfect. Then we have in here, it's like a comment: consultants in ISO 17021 are considered as part of industry, as can be a sole proprietor. They are not public. I'm not quite sure I understand it very well. And here we have another one: disinfectants and textile medical device, bandages and medical equipment are related to medical devices. I am a TC member on all of these, as well as TC 1039. This comes from Simon Rudolph Short.
Okay, so this is basically the answer to Melanie.
Yes.
Believe. Oh, thanks. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We know that you have to run. Thank you very much. I think it has really been very, very helpful. Stephen, back to you.
Thanks to both of you, and thanks for the flexibility of the panelists. Now, with that brief touch on standardization, coming back to the current situation and roadmap for the future on the legislative and regulatory framework for medical devices, going back to you, Lydia, for your views, you being, of course, the manager for registration and medical device regulation at SAHPRA. And then we will go to Madeline and then to Q&A, and I already have questions for all of the panelists. So over to you, Lydia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Stephen. I'll start to share my screen. Sandra, maybe you could, if you have my presentation, you could help me with that. It looks like I'm struggling a bit here. Sandra? Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lydia Motlogelwa. I'm the medical device registration manager. I'm gonna speak today about the medical device regulation status, the current status. Next slide, please. Okay. When we look at SAHPRA's vision, mission, and values, Our vision as SAPRA is to be an agile and responsive health products regulator that is globally recognized as an enabler of access to safe, effective, and quality health products in South Africa. Our mission is to promote access to health products and protect human and animal health in South Africa through making science-based regulatory decisions. And our values is Ubuntu humanity, responsiveness, integrity, transparency, efficiency, and excellence. Okay. Okay. When we look at publication of the medical devices for comment, we did receive when it was publicized in April 2021, we did receive a comment from 23 respondents, 12 of which are associations, industry association, 11 is individual organizations. When the comment was closed in August 2021, we started collating the comments together in September, and then the internal review started around November, where we sit as internal team to review. Then it went to our medical device expert committee for review. Then the internal document was updated, and then the update was shared with industry has a group, ITG working group. Furthermore, it went to management, where we got recommendation from management and the legal working group. And then we update the industry on the review status of the regulations. Moving forward, is stage 3, where we submitted to executive committee. And then the executive committee has submitted to the board. And from there, the board will share it with NDOH, and then we'll share the communication. I think this is my last slide. The next slide, please. In our intention, actually, based on our intention is to have the publication of the regulations. And once we've got the regulation being publicized, we'll start doing guidelines that will support the regulations. And those guidelines, we wish them to be published so that we can, there will be additional guidelines based on what is change on the regulations. We will be having clinical trials, post-marketing surveillance, fee structure, for example, and technical dossier, etc. Then from there, we will move towards doing a pilot for product collab for registration, as we are currently doing only licensing. And then during that pilot process, we'll be looking at resource capacity, IT infrastructure, and then we will be engaging the stakeholders and ensuring that training is done, and etc. All the activities that we'll need to go up to the product collab. And then when we go up to the product collab, which will be a transition period where we need to ensure that even if the product are called up, we don't disturb the availability of the medical devices to the public. Once this product collab transition period has come up, we will move straight after we have built up resources in IT infrastructure and all the guidelines that we need. We will definitely move into product registration. So in terms of the publication, because I've seen a lot of questions with regard to publication of the medical device regulations. It's a process that will be after the board. The board will submit it to the National Department of Health, and the process there we don't have control over, and then we will move according to what is happening there. And then once the publication of the medical regulation is done, we will definitely communicate the status of the medical device regulations. But at the moment, the process of publication of the medical device regulation, it will be under the control of the National Department of Health, where they will follow their own process in terms of that. I think, Sandra, that will be my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you very much for the comprehensive overview. And maybe I could take the opportunity now to go back to the chat and the Q&A and clear out the questions we had before we broke over to the other panel session. And then I have some questions of my own for as we go to all three of you now. And some of these seem to be more comments than questions, but yes, Dr. Matibe.
No, Stephen, let me allow you, and then I'll come to that. Let me not disturb your chain of thought. Please continue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So for we have in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee, they state that the problem is that they are not sending out a detention notice with each detention. This makes it difficult to respond in all cases. I'm not sure of the full context here, but wish to see if anyone from SOPRA wished to respond to that comment.
I'm not sure I understand. Stephen, let me see, what is the question again?
It says the problem is that they are not sending out a detention notice with each detention. This makes it difficult to respond in all cases.
Detention notice. Okay, then maybe let me look at the question.
I think if I may come in, this is a follow-up on the earlier question, Stephen, regarding the port of entry where products are detained. So where I've indicated in my answer that, you know, at customs, if they block a product and they request certain information, we do provide information. So it's in the company's best interest to make sure that when they, because the port of entry does ask for, do you have a license with SAPRA, they weigh bill and all that, and they detain it. And we have another unit, which is a regulatory compliance unit. They keep in touch with us on any product that is stopped at the port of entry, and they ask us quickly if this product is a medical device or not. And then based on that, we respond accordingly. But that is a function that is done by our compliance unit, but they do contact us if a product is detained immediately. So I'm thinking, I'm not too sure about the statement, but of why are they detained? If I mean, at customs, they don't work with SAPRA, they don't have all the information. If they want to question a parcel or any goods that coming into the country, they have a right, and you have, as an applicant, you have to produce the right documents so they can release it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Matibe. And maybe as I read the next question, I could solicit the assistance from Sandra. We have a question in the chat that is not in the Q&A. So could you kindly post the earlier question from Simone Rudolph Short that begins industry for the past 5 years. If you could put that in the Q&A, and that would allow Dr. Matibe to respond to it, but I will read it here for the panelists. It says, industry for the past 5 years have communicated issues and resolutions for Act 101 and COVID and international new regulatory approach, e.g. the MDR, which has shown an urgent need for Act 101 revision, as does enabling convergence to African harmonization. Do we need public intervention to enable urgency to Act 101 improvement?
Mm-hmm. I have responded. It was posted, Stephen, if you check the questions in Q&A. I'm not too sure who moved it.
Okay, very good.
Yes,
thank you.
It was moved. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So with that, I wish to really come back now to the Q&A, and this leads into the next panel discussion. But in the current and evolving regulatory framework, given the conversation we had yesterday on the international benchmarks on health from the World Health Organization, on trade from the World Trade Organization, and as these are reinforced at the African regional level, be it under the AMDF or under the AFCFTA, and even the regional economic community and sub-regional trade commitments, are there provisions being envisioned on how the framework will incorporate and reference and embody, implement, so to speak, operationalize the international references of the World Health Organization, of the World Trade Organization, and down at the African regional level, with a goal of really realizing the objective of a medical device regulatory convergence and using common standards for medical technology regulation in South Africa and across the region?
Yeah, I can assist with that.
Okay.
The current regulations and even the previous regulations and even the guidelines that are published on our website, Stephen, they are indicating that as SAHPRA we are implementing and also showing our interest into reliance practices and good regulatory practices, looking at international requirements. So, for example, as I indicated, we are now being invited to attend the MIDRF platform to be part of the MIDRF from the AMDF perspective, as well as from a country perspective. We're also being invited to attend the meeting now that is coming in September. So we know we have shown interest and we were invited so that we are aligned and understand the changes of the regulatory environment, because it's not a steady, or it's not a stable or standing process. It's changing with time. So as indicated yesterday in our discussion, and if you look at our regulations, even the updated one, we have taken into consideration other international regulatory authorities that have put in place, and then also looking at MIDRF. And as I indicated yesterday when Agnes was here, we are also a member of the CRP, but based on the fact that we do not have some of the regulatory framework, when we were approached last year, for example, we don't have the fee structure. And once we've sorted that, we will definitely do a pilot under the CRP, because we have applied to be a member of the CRP. So we're working with also our colleagues from WHO, as well as, I think I also need to mention yesterday on Kanye's presentation, she indicated that the office of our CEO as well have signed various memorandum of understanding with various regulatory authority, and in that point, we are communicating with the specific department within, for example, TGAU, looking at Singapore, Health Singapore, MHRA, where we can go and seek Brazil, for example, where we can seek and ask for assistance, and as well as USFDA. So we are aligned and trying to make sure that we are not far from the requirements, but not forgetting that we also have our regulatory, our law, our act, which is defining where we can go and where we cannot go. So we also have to not take what is happening out there without considering our legal framework. We have to consider our legal framework as well, and any decision that we make. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Matibe. Any additional reaction from Bongani or you, Lydia, before I proceed to the next follow-up question?
Unfortunately, as I indicated in one of my answers, Bongani has asked to leave, so maybe Lydia can comment, but Bongani has left. Thanks.
Okay, comment to, what's the question again, Stephen?
Well, maybe I'll come at it from another angle, Lydia, in that as we conduct the MDRC work with the different regulatory authorities and jurisdictions, we operate on the observation that each country, there's no country in the world that has, and there's no regulatory authority for medical devices that has sufficient resources for their mandate. It's a struggle in every country, including the United States. we would, in our experience, the size of the medical device teams of the regulatory authorities is somewhere between 5 and 20. In some cases, it's 50. I'd say one outlier is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and their Center for Devices and Radiological Health that has 2,000 employees in the medical device division alone out of 15,000 for the whole agency. But even under the good regulatory practice law and provisions of the United States, the US FDA says that even with their 2,000 employees, they do not have sufficient resources to justify creating United States FDA unique technical regulations and standards that are not based upon international standards. And so much of the, I'd say the vast majority of the US FDA medical device regulatory work is dedicated toward participation in international standardization, be it in ISO, IEC, or elsewhere, and then working with the global community to ensure that the international reference documents, be it IMDRF or Global Harmonization Working Party or WHO, or as reference documents, that the standards themselves from the standards developing organizations are appropriate, and then the FDA in turn then uses them for medical device purposes. And through that program, there's a de facto goal to create zero technical regulations for medical devices that are not based upon international standard. And that, in our experience, is what regulatory convergence looks like. One of my favorite sayings is, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it. And so it's important in our view, the MDRC view, that there be a goal of creating zero country unique technical regulations that are not based upon international standards. And as a follow-up to the previous question, and certainly the MDRC looks forward to working with SAHPRA in the development of the framework and in public consultation. I would be curious in your views on just the preliminary thinking, so to speak, of SAHPRA on the regulatory reliance and recognition mechanisms that we just spoke about. It's one thing to talk about regulatory reliance and recognition, and then it's another to start getting into the specifics of what that means in operation when a technician is asked to begin drafting a technical regulation. So I know it was a long comment and a long question, but I would be curious in your views and also that of Dr. Matibe in response.
Okay, I would start by saying currently we only doing licensing, and through licensing we are referencing to the IMDRF, and we are also reliant to WHO, and other regulatory authorities that SAHPRA aligns themselves with. So it is quite clear that we are not, we are referencing to all other developed regulatory authorities in order to go and be able to develop a technical dossier. So we're not looking at our like SAHPRA on its own. Like you said, it's very difficult to do that on our own. We develop, we relying on IMDRF. Most of our, like for example, for essential principles, medical device principles, we also base it on the document that was derived from the IMDRF. And also we looking at WHO, and then they've got their own, also the CRP, collaborative regulatory process. We also looking at that, as Dr. Matibe has already explained to you, and I think my colleague Khanyisile Nkuku did mention that yesterday during her presentation.
Thank you, Lydia. I see Dr. Matibe, your hand is up.
Thank you very much. No, I wanted to come towards the end of your maybe your clarification or your questions as a statement to indicate that, you know, we are fully aware that the industry can't wait to have the updated regulations published. But as Lydia indicated, it's an internal and external process that we have to follow with a lot of industry engagement. And I think they can attest to that, that we didn't just publish for comments and update and publish. So we did some engagement with the industry, but we also have to be given an opportunity to do internal review of the documents, and we'll definitely publish it as soon as possible. That is the intention as well. It's one of the requirements or the objective from the medical device unit to ensure that we publish updated regulations. And as I'm saying, I know that most people want to know when will it be published, and we will definitely communicate that when it's ready to be published, because it still has to go to the minister. I think everyone knows the process. I don't have to explain that. And once that has been done, then we will definitely publish. But we know that internally we have done, most of the work that we put it forward to our executive committee last week for finalization after it came back from the board of SAPRA. So once we get a feedback, a final on what the way forward, definitely we'll take it to the Ministry of Health for publication. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mutibe. We do have some questions, but I wish to turn now to Madeline Pierce for her remarks, and then we can come back to questions and close out this panel. Thank you, Lydia. Over to Madeline.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me clearly, guys?
Loud and clear.
Awesome, thank you. So it's been an interesting discussion and an interesting couple of days, and thank you very much to the organizers. It's long overdue that we've, we need to have a discussion about good regulatory practice. I should just introduce myself briefly so people know who I am. I represent industry through an organization called SAMED, which is the South African Medical Device Technology Association. And we also have a collaboration with many other trade associations who are also in the medical device space. For example, the people who manufacture medical devices in South Africa, MDMSA, the laboratory diagnostics people, SALDA. There's a number of others, medical imaging, and there's a number of associated trade associations like the dental traders and even animal health, and some of the pharmaceutical trade associations who also collaborate with us under something called the Industry Task Group Working Group for Medical Devices. And I'm the chair of that. I'm also the chair of the regulatory committee. So the reason I'm sort of rolling out these credentials is I want to tell you that what I'm saying this afternoon is a collaborative input from multiple experts in the industry. And the one thing that South Africa does have is that we are highly networked as experts, because often we work for organizations that are multinational, so we understand the impact of introduction of regulations around the world. We've also had a long history of collaborating on multilateral forums where regulators and industry work together to try and map out how medical devices should be regulated in an efficient manner. And we have been working on this for many, many years. And we have so much to draw on and so much to contribute. So I always want to stand in front of the regulator and say to them, here are your experts. We can be trusted because we also believe in a regulatory framework that will bring safe and effective and good quality medical devices to the South African health system and beyond. And what we don't want to do is to end up with a regulatory framework that is not harmonized because it has legacy overhang from an act that clearly is not designed for medical device regulation. And, there was so much goodwill and input yesterday about good regulatory practice, but the devil is in the detail. And what happens is that the actual implementation of regulation in this country becomes extremely frustrating for industry, to the point where people simply cannot comply. And I only anticipate it getting worse as some of the aspects of regulation get implemented. At the moment, we are literally still at licensing and listing of products, with some exceptions through COVID. Now, what happened over COVID was suddenly the medical device sector was thrust into the center stage. And everybody was asking, you know, what quality of goods are coming into the country? What oversight is there? And suddenly SAPRA probably wasn't really ready to have to do the amount of oversight that they needed to do. And I mean, they were very fast to act, and I must give them credence for that. What they did was they ended up creating some sort of quasi-regulatory frameworks for some of the COVID-sensitive products. To name but a few, it would be the IVD test kits, it would be things like the ventilators, some of the personal protective equipment, some of the disinfectants, some, you know, there were a number of products that were sensitive to COVID, and they rightly did that. And I also want to commend SAPRA on trying to navigate a new framework for the sector under an act that really doesn't suit them. But the concern is, guys, that we've talked about good regulatory practice. We haven't seen real impact assessment done. We're not sure that rolling things out as they seem to be rolling out at the moment is actually going to be workable. And you also have to take into cognizance the capacity of the regulator and also the capacity of industry. Because remember, the medical device industry is not pharma. Pharma is a concentrated number of companies who have highly, highly skilled personnel. There has to be a responsible pharmacist at each of those companies. There is a whole track and trace through the supply chain, which is why you have things like manufacturer, distributor, wholesaler, and the like in your regulation. And that is what the Act was built around. The unfortunate bit is that the medical device industry has now got to fit into that supply chain. So we are absolutely adamant that we cannot have wholesaler licenses in the medical device field. The reason we can't is because it doesn't follow the way that you're supposed to run your quality management system under ISO 13485, which is the standard for medical devices and quality management systems for them. As well as that, the regulator seems to have ad hoc guidelines that are not harmonized. There are decisions made that don't honor the transition from 2016 when these regulations were first introduced to today. And we are now in the situation where we have a number of medical device companies that will have to renew their licenses this year. You know, there are aspects of the renewal process that haven't been changed since 5 years ago. And unfortunately, you know, the spreadsheet that you have to fill in is still unworkable, full of protected cells, makes it very difficult for companies. So the point I'm trying to make is that you have a multitude of different kinds of companies with different levels of expertise trying to comply with the regulations. But the regulator has to take into account that there are probably many people who haven't even heard about the regulations that are marketing medical devices. And the ones that are probably still going up a very steep learning curve, as is the regulator. So it is with concern that we hear that the regulations are now going to be going to the Government Gazette. We haven't actually had a proper report out, although we do thank SAPRA very much for the constructive workshops that we held last year. But the reality is there are a couple of key issues which Dr. Dimakatso and the team are very well aware of. We keep talking about them, and they haven't been resolved. And now we're going to regulations. So my concern is, are we really taking to heart the principles of good regulatory practice? Or are we having to bow to the pressures of what is going on in the department and the legislative framework and the timetable that is dictated by our bosses and the political situation? So there is concern, but what I do hope is that we'll continue to collaborate and that we will continue to have open dialogue, which actually ends up with making a difference, because it's no good giving comments and having nothing coming back, which actually makes a material difference to our issues. I think that's probably all I wanted to cover. I mean, there's so much to discuss, but those are our key issues, is that collaboration is only good if it results in regulations that we can work with easily. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Maybe just a remark, and then I'll go to the broader panel for their reaction. But every country is at a different level of implementing foundational good regulatory practices. Some countries have been doing it for decades, and others it hasn't yet begun. And we're delighted to see that South Africa is one of the countries that is on the path of committing itself to implementing whole of government foundational good regulatory practices, which we refer to in the context of the MDRC as Tier 1. Tier 2 being the activity with the health authorities to implement the foundational Tier 1 elements. And there's an activity there that we affectionately call Tier 1.5, which is that overlap. It's the taking of the horizontal and then working with the authorities to really build it down into the line agencies. In the case of our sector, it's with the regulatory authorities, in some cases, the ministries or secretaries of health. But of course, that activity needs to happen with the other sectors, with the other regulatory authorities and other USAID projects and other industry associations and convergence initiatives. And there's a bit of a challenge that we observe where you have, for example, let's take the example of the World Health Organization. They've got not just the reference, that one of the primary WHO reference documents for medical technologies, the Global Model Regulatory Framework, which is in the process of being updated, and also the Global Benchmarking Tool, plus for medical technologies. And we've seen some tension between there being a push, a desire for countries to, say, achieve WHO level 3 maturity level designation assessment so that the country can then produce, for example, the COVID-19 vaccine. And in order to get that, they need to have all of these different WHO GRP elements in place. Of course, you cannot just take something from WHO and cut and paste it into a country, because necessarily if the WHO's own guidelines on good regulatory practices are followed, that necessarily means that there is going to be a notice of rulemaking, a comment period, responses to comment period, which itself takes several years. So there's some inherent tension there of a country and a regulatory authority wishing to rapidly catch up, and also being faithful to the text and spirit of good regulatory practices. And we're delighted to have with SAHPRA a regulatory authority that's striding that chasm and willing to dedicate itself to the implementation of the foundational good regulatory practices, but yet within the context of the existing and evolving legislative domestic framework. And of course, as we talked about yesterday, that's overlaid by the existing commitments that South Africa has made as a sovereign country to abide by the terms in international treaties of, for example, the World Trade Organization, which requires that all technical regulations for all sectors be based upon international standards. And so a lot of the work of the MDRC is really developing the work streams to operationalize all of this in the context of GRP, in the context of the benchmarks on health from WHO and elsewhere, in the context of the legal obligations, the trade obligations from WTO, and at the African and sub-regional levels. And so you raised some very important points, Madeline, and I think that should absolutely figure into the development of the work streams and the dialogue with SAHPRA. I wish to, before we go to some of the questions, just go to Dr. Mutibe and also Lydia to see if we have any response or reaction from them on your remarks.
No response from my side. I hear what Madeleine and the complaints or the concerns that are being shared by the industry, and we have taken them into consideration, and hence we're here. That's the reason why we are all here. We are here openly so to hear all this, and then we see how we go forward. But I just also want to emphasize the importance that we do have a legal a framework, an act that we have to work within the boundaries of the act. We cannot go and do as we please, both as a regulator. We have a document that we work with as our base, and with the regulations are coming from the act, and the guidelines are coming from the regulations and the act. So we also have to take that into consideration because what I will also indicate that there's an expectation that we just have to follow, but we also have to consider not only one act, there are various acts that we have to consider before we can make any decision. And what SAHPRA's decision is based, as we said, it's a risk-based decision. And what you have indicated is that you are here to support us, in ensuring that we put in place a good regulatory practice as well as the reliance. And hence we opened our hands and a door and say, no, we appreciate the, what's coming our way, and we are open to learn from both the industry on what can be done. But at the end of the day, we all have to take into consideration what the regulation differs for each and every country based on their legal framework. So we also have to make a decision based on the legal framework, as well as looking at what other international organizations are doing. And we definitely are listening. We are definitely listening, and hence we are here. So we are receiving that, and we have to go back and work on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mutibe, and not in the order that they came in, but maybe most relevant to that last interjection. Anonymous attendee says, thank you, Madeline, well said. To SAHPRA, please hear that we are here to support SAHPRA and make medical device legislation a success, with which we wholeheartedly agree. There's an additional comment from an anonymous attendee, and I think this is probably more for you, Madeline, wearing your SAHMED hat. But it says, how do the highly networked professionals from the ITG and SAHMED get all this information to SME that cannot afford to join, as the cost cannot be justified to becoming a member of trade associations? After your response, I might provide my views from the US experience in that regard, but please.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. And I think it's absolutely relevant. There are a lot of small and medium enterprises who may be involved. They have just a couple of people in their staff. Remember, we also have an absolute national emergency when it comes to employment in this country. And the medical device sector is a growing sector. And so it would be remiss of us not to support those emerging businesses. And yes, we take the point that they can't always be networked. They can't always pay for trade association fees. They might be out of the loop. And I think that was also my appeal to the regulator. Remember, when you're talking to the ITG or to SAHMED, you may not be talking to all stakeholders. And I think that generally, I've noticed that the regulator is aware of this. But obviously, we have to find ways to disseminate the information in a way that really does reach all players in the industry, and also to support them on their learning curve to get to the point of compliance. What cannot be compromised, however, is we cannot have people trading against the law and in a non-conforming way, because that means that you have products going to patients or the public that are of arbitrary quality. So there are various forums that SAHMED hosts. There are various opportunities and workshops that government sometimes opens up. We've had those in the past, but I think this is an area we need to work on to bring everybody with us. And I'll certainly bring back your comments to my committee and appreciate the comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. And maybe I would just add to that, back to the SME question. Certainly within AdvaMed, we're a broad-based MedTech trade association. We have a subdivision that is specifically for SMEs, and SMEs comprise the majority of our members, 2/3 of them. But when I'm an engineer, electrical engineer by training, I came up through the manufacturing ranks, both working for companies, but also as a market access and regulatory compliance engineer, and having participated on standards committees and worked in public consultation to revise technical regulations. So I've kind of run the gamut in different aspects. So it might be helpful to this conversation, just a few observations in that one of the overarching benefits of GRP and the use of international standards within GRP is the transparency it affords to the regulated sector, but to all stakeholders, which has multiple benefits. On the benefits on the regulatory side is that it broadens the input pool and the review pool to the broadest possible set, so that the draft regulation can really undergo a test by fire, and that when it is ultimately published, it is structured in a way that is practical and meets the stated regulatory objectives. There's quite a bit of filtering that's done through the GRP process. If you look, for example, in the European Union, they've got a regulatory scrutiny board, and roughly 40% of the draft technical regulations of different types that get sent to them get turned back because they don't meet the fundamental checklist of GRP. And I'd say it's probably a similar figure within other countries such as the United States, where the central regulatory coordinating body does not have the technical competence to deem whether a draft measure is appropriate or not. They are just the arbiters and the judges, the referees, so to speak, of the regulatory process. Was the issue in the regulatory agenda? Was there an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking? Was there a notice of proposed rulemaking? Was public consultation conducted? Did the regulatory authority respond to the public consultation with meaningful comments? Were the timelines followed? Was a risk-based approach followed? Were international standards used? Was a retroactive review conducted? And the central regulatory coordinating body or structure, again, has no technical knowledge on medical devices or any other sector. They just look, did the regulatory authority follow the process? And if it didn't, it goes back to the beginning, because they've seen the costs that they have to bear of regulations that are improperly structured. So a well-constructed public consultation is not meant to slow the process. It's meant to have the broadest possible pool for inputs to really have a robust and well-functioning technical regulation that works for everyone. And it's similar in the standards development process. Standards themselves they have to undergo the participation of all relevant stakeholders, from the regulatory authority, from industry, even from patient groups and hospitals and other providers of valid input. And the value of the international standards then is that you've got the broadest possible pool. You've got a global pool of technical experts feeding into these technical documents that are in constant maintenance cycles that then remain at the availability of the regulatory authorities to be used as a basis for the technical regulations. And just pulling this back to SMEs, when the regulatory process is based on GRPs and when they're based, the technical regulations are based on international standards, that really increases transparency and lowers the barriers for all companies, particularly SMEs, to engage in the process. The larger companies have the resources, even though they are not happy to use the resources, they have the resources to kind of plow through the less than fully transparent regulatory processes and standards processes, but the SMEs do not. And so it's really mostly important for the smallest companies that the GRP be implemented. And just speaking on the medtech sector, it's a global sector that we very much, MDRC, we AdvaMed and partners, we very much seek a broader footprint, a broader and more diversified global footprint of medtech manufacturing, all working towards the same set of international reference documents and standards. And in particular, that means increased local production everywhere in the world, including South Africa. But it's really the most onerous on South African medtech manufacturers if the local technical regulations and standards are not internationally aligned. And so to level that playing field, I'd say that's really one of the most important aspects and benefits that can come from foundational GRP implementation and regulatory and standards convergence. And of course, we take the action to follow up with SAMED on the different methodologies by which that can be extended to SMEs. I'm just looking at the next question here. It says, why is the regulator only talking to associations and not licensees? They have AR details. ITG is from historical pharma with RP. This is a big difference between pharma and MD medical devices in that the AR is not a professional registered person. It has been said that many businesses are not part of associations. Why is SOPRA not communicating with ARs? And I will put that question to every member of the panel.
Well, I think the person best placed to answer it is probably the regulator, Stephen, because we need to understand their communication plan to industry. So maybe Dr. Matibe, I don't know if you can answer.
We do communicate to the AR, so we publish any communication directly to all the applicant, and we are encouraging, like last week, we had a workshop where we had our communications manager in that workshop that indicates the changes that is done to the SAPRA website. So if there is any communication, we put it on our website, and we extend actually, our hand and ITG members to assist us in disseminating the information. But all the applicants and all the people that are interested or who are working in this industry have access to our website. So with us sharing with the other associations, just to extend to assist us in disseminating the information, but we do communicate to all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Stephen, may I make a comment?
Please.
Obviously, Dr. Matiba, we recognize that, if you're an applicant, you know that there's a SAPRA website and you know that there is communication that comes from that, and the ITG also does its dissemination. So yes, exactly. My concern is people who are trading in this space that are not licensed and don't know anything about what the requirements are. I'm just wondering how on earth we're going to reach people like that, because they wouldn't be looking at the SAPRA website because they wouldn't know about the requirements. So it's just a thought that, when you communicate to pharma, it is a very well-established communication plan with the ITG. And as we said before, the number of pharma companies is relatively few. I'm just concerned that we're missing a whole piece of the industry simply because they're not formally connected to the industry. Just a thought.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thanks, Madeline. Point taken.
Thank you, Dr. Matibe. There's a couple of items in the chat maybe I can address here briefly. One question from Simone says, Dear Stephen, when you say international guidelines, is this all EU MDR, US FDA, others? How does a regulator choose or navigate to select a regulatory pathway? So when I was speaking and mentioning the international reference documents, I was speaking to what we reviewed principally yesterday on the health side, being the WHO documents and the IMDRF documents, of course, as well, those of the Global Harmonization Working Party. Of the WHO, there's the 4 principal documents, and I think maybe, Sandra, you could include that link in the chat here. I know we did that yesterday, but it includes the WHO Global Model Regulatory Framework, the Good Regulatory Practices document, the Good Reliance Practices document, and the Post-Market Surveillance document. And from the IMDRF, there's a kind of a core set of very relevant documents on good regulatory reliance principles. We would say if you had to pick one, it'd start with the N47, which is the Essential Principles document, which gets into the real bare bones that national regulatory authorities should be examining, including the use of international standards as a basis for technical regulations. And that's what I was referring to. When a regulatory authority then is looking at operationalizing these international health benchmark documents, then they can make the determination of what they view as a trusted regulatory authority. And it may vary by country depending on trade flows and relevance and alignment of those criteria with the WHO and IMDRF. Common ones include the US FDA, the EU system, Saudi Arabia, and a few others. There's an additional, it looks like it's more of a comment than a question, but I'm going to read it here from Katya. It says, the difference in the controls for the devices compared with pharmaceuticals needs to reflect several factors, including differences in the type of industry, the profile for the products, the risk assessment of the products, and the approach to generating efficacy and effectiveness data. Devices are primarily engineering products with shorter development times for the product, and the difficulties in undertaking major clinical studies in some areas before marketing. The regulatory approach is therefore passed on conformity assessment and post-market surveillance. It can be argued that the control point for devices is post-marketing, whereas for medicines, it is pre-marketing supplemented by phase 4 studies. Any reactions from the panelists on that comment in the chat? No takers?
I'm trying to read, because it's very difficult on the chat, because I have to scroll and read through it.
I agree.
May you please, I'm not too sure who put up that comment.
That was from Katja Suleiman. And
Okay.
maybe Sandra Lechisi, it might be possible to bring that over into the Q&A to enable Dr. Mutibe and others to answer.
Okay, I'm reading it now. I found it. Thank you.
If I can just make a quick comment, I agree with Khatija. And what she's really saying is that the most impactful regulation is post-market for medical devices. Oh, please excuse my wolves. I'm going to put myself on mute.
Very good. And maybe just an administrative item. We had planned to go back to the other panel session on medical device technical standardization and get the presentation from Dusty Miller representing SAMED, but it seems Dusty is experiencing some technical difficulties. And so what I think we'll do is, for just administratively for the remainder of the time and having consulted with Sandra, we will take the remaining time here to just close out questions on this first panel, and then we will turn back to the subject of standardization and medical devices and the relationship to GRP and regulatory convergence at a future session in this installment, in this webinar. So apologies for that change of schedule, but just so that we can focus and close out this conversation, Dr. Mutibe, please.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize that both pre-marketing and post-marketing surveillance is important, because with the pre-marketing, we're looking at the product safety and quality, and then where the reviewers will be reviewing before we can receive it. And the post-marketing, it is one of the controls. If you're looking at the WHO model framework for product registration. So as I indicated that we are following various processes, we're looking at various processes to ensure that there is compliance, and post-marketing surveillance is important. I totally agree with it, but I totally agree with that sentiment. But we also have to look at the pre-marketing, because if we are only focusing on the post-marketing for bringing the product into our market, then there are substandard product and falsified product that we also have to take into consideration. We cannot do that as an aftermath after the product is registered, but I do agree that is important, and it's one of the controls. It's not the only control. Thank you.
I'll go to the next question and then supplement it with some of my own related inquiries. It says, from an anonymous attendee, we thank you for considering our feedback, and we understand from your comments that your ability to adopt best practices are restricted somewhat by the Act. If the foundational law prevents adoption of necessary changes to keep pace with innovation and best practices, should the Act be updated? And I'll reflect here that one of my favorite sayings is, much was decided before I was born. So it may very well be that the Act needs to be updated, but maybe I can layer on top of that the following. Absolutely, the regulatory authority must follow the fundamental law. What happens if the law is not square or not aligned with the treaty-based obligations that South Africa has assumed, for example, with the World Trade Organization, which in the hierarchy of rules, constitution, treaty, federal law, et cetera, takes priority over domestic law? What happens when the domestic law is not properly squared with the international treaty obligations? But maybe I'll put this back to you, Dr. Mutibe. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know whether that's the case here, but if that were to be the case, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. But I think Bongani has clarified that, and that's the reason why he indicated that the Act is under review and that will be published for public comment, because some areas within the Act were looked at and then looked at what is happening in the industry and the environment at the current moment. So hence there is a consideration to update the current Act to ensure that it's aligned to the environment, but still compliance being part of the most important, and the risk of the patient being one of the most important parts that is considered. But he has indicated that the Act is currently under review and it will be published for public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Matibe. Just as we're nearing the top of the hour, I wish to give each of you an opportunity. Any final remarks from any of you on this panel discussion? Madeline, please.
Up.
Just okay. Dimokata, do you want to go ahead first?
No, I was
No?
just looking at your
Oh,
hand on the
okay.
photo, so I was just indicating to Stephen that you've got your hand up.
Oh, all right, thank you. No, just to say thank you very much for convening the conversation. I was delighted to see the huge number of participants on the call. You can see the interest. So for our colleagues from SAHPRA, I know it's a big job. All I would urge you to do is to keep consulting. Please take us into your confidence that we can get this right. And also, let's not try and do everything all at once. I love the idea that there's going to be a pilot and that there's going to be transitional arrangements so that we can get this right. And let's bring everybody with us in a practical way. And the most important thing is that patients in South Africa have access to safe, quality and affordable medical devices, and we don't end up somehow creating some sort of bottleneck for supply. So I know that everybody has those sentiments in mind, and I urge us all to work together very well. And thank you very much, Stephen, for convening the session.
Thank you, Madeline. Any final remarks from SAHPRA? With that, then, I will pass it back to you, Sandra.
I would just like to say to the industry that we really appreciate their contribution, especially towards the regulations. It's much appreciated. It shows that we are working together to making health products available in South Africa that are safe, of quality, and which are efficacious and that performs very well for medical devices. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Sandra, over to you.
Thank you very much. So really, thank you very much for all the panelists. So for the closing comments, Dr. Matibe, I would welcome you to join us.
Thank you very much. And thanks to the panel members today who participated and all the questions and comments that we have received today in today's session. We really appreciate that. And I think we will communicate further other workshops that we will hold and other different workshops as well, not with the MDRC, that we will communicate accordingly and publish accordingly. So I will urge that our industry partners as well look into our SAHPRA website to ensure that they are also part of this, and we will speak to our communication as well, because on how can we ensure that we invite all the stakeholders in this kind of engagement, and with the intention to speak to the regulations. So thank you very much for that. And I just want to emphasize one thing, and that where we are standing and where we are moving forward is that we have to be responsive. And I just want to highlight to the industry that we have to understand that there will be a situation where we agree and disagree on certain areas, but understand where our decision is coming from as a regulator, and we are a regulator in this instance, that we will listen and we take heed of all the points that are taken forward, are brought forward to our attention, that we have to consider when we're finalizing. But we have to remember the mandate of SAHPRA. We are a regulator, we have to regulate this. We cannot change. If Europe change, we change. If US change, we change. If for example, Australia change, we change. Then we must be able to remember that we are not servicing only one market internationally. We are also servicing local manufacturer that we have to, when we are looking at publishing any guidelines or any regulations, we are not only focusing on Europe, on US, or we are encompassing all the industry players. So, there's one thing I'll say now, it's not that we are gonna make everybody happy, but we have to go back to our mandate, which is making sure that all the people in South Africa have safe, good quality, and products that are working as intended. And for that, we will still engage, and we are open to engage and also attend forums that are done by the industry, just to put across the message and also share the update of what's happening. And as indicated by Madeleine, there's a lot that's happening in SAHPRA at the moment. And, you know, we at some point will be quiet because we're still trying to, you know, clean up some of the stuff, and then we'll come out and speak to the industry. And hence I'm saying this is one opportunity for us to come out and saying this is where we are, and we will not shy away of where we are at. We'll definitely not shy away. So thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everyone for your time in attending. Really appreciate it. Over to you, Sandra. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matibie. And I join Dr. Matibie's words, sharing our appreciation for all the panelists that joined us today. And of course, for all the participants, it is kind of like obvious that there's a lot of interest on what's going on and on learning how we can all together write this really great opportunity that we have in front of us as to move forward into ensuring, as Dr. Matibie is mentioning, and as it is the commitment from all of us in here, to have quality products, safe products into the market, and for the local manufacturers also to be able to export their manufactured goods to other countries in the world. And having these conversations, all of us learning on the best possible way to convey the development of regulations, how to leverage all the guidelines that the WHO has developed as to facilitate those processes and make the most effective use of the resources available at the agencies and, of course, at the manufacturer levels. It's a way for us to help and comply with our responsibility with the health of patients in South Africa. So working all together, utilizing as a base the good regulatory practices, and within those, the proper and timely utilization of international standards is kind of like I would say like a safety net for all the work we do. And in that regard, I think, again, international references, international standards, following the principles of the good regulatory practices is kind of like the most effective and safe way for us to continue in this journey. So thank you very much. Our apologies for the technical inconvenience that we had for this issue, but as Stephen was mentioning, this is just the first series of many others that we will be implementing as part of the MDRC project with the support of Dr. Matibie and her team, that we're really very appreciative of that as well, and also on other items that and events that Dr. Matibie and her team are putting together. So thank you very much, and look forward to meet you all in the next issues that we will have. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.